Welcome to our Bible study on the prophets. My name is Peter. Today in this lecture, we are going to talk about Isaiah and the mystery of faith. First, let me tell you a story. Between years 735 and 715 in Judah, there was a king named Ahaz. At the same time, more or less, when Ahaz came to power, in the northern kingdom of Israel, there was another king named Pekah, and he was creating an anti-Assyrian movement. So all surrounding kingdoms, the small kingdoms around Damascus, means Syria, Ascalon, and Gaza, joined the coalition, but Judah refused. So the king from the north attacked Judah in order to change the power in Jerusalem, and so the coalition would get stronger. The attack progressed very well, and in 735 before Christ, Jerusalem was besieged by this small coalition. And then comes this famous passage from prophet Isaiah. God, through the prophet Isaiah, is telling Ahaz not to be afraid of them, but to trust in God. And he even is willing to provide a sign for him. But Ahaz apparently says, I will not ask and I will not put the Lord to the test. But this expression of external piety should not deceive us, because Ahaz, at the same time, sent messengers to the powerful king of Assyria asking for help. And Isaiah is not pleased with Ahaz's action. Simply by this, the king shows that he does not trust in God's power to save his people. But the conversation between Isaiah and Ahaz brings to us a problem that we often face in our world. Isaiah offered words. Assyria had an army. We are encouraged to rely on faith in our personal life. But to rely on faith in the realm of politics seems too much for Ahaz. It seems that when it comes to politics, to be son and servant of the king of Assyria seems to be better than to be a son and servant of the invisible God. But what does Isaiah think about that? That the people has taken refuge in a lie. Of course, asking for help had to be accompanied by generous payment. So gold and silver from the treasury in the temple were sent to Assyria. That offer, that payment was accepted, the help was provided, Judah was free, but the enemies were destroyed. Ahaz was so thrilled by the power and religion of Assyrians that after paying homage to the king of Assyria, he ordered to copy it and installed in the temple at Jerusalem the same altar he saw in Damascus. It was simply acknowledgement, the Assyrian power, and public recognition of their gods. Unthinkable for a true Israelite. As I mentioned already, Isaiah saw it as a refuge in lie, a covenant with death. But what should be the right response? To stay neutral. Neither joining the coalition against Assyria nor relying on Assyria was the right option. prophet is convinced that the world is in the hands of God, and it was folly to be afraid or to rely on foreign powers. Unfortunately, Ahaz and his politicians thought differently, and they congratulated themselves for making such a wise decision. To this, Isaiah responds in these words: because the people refuse to rely on God and rejoice over the destruction of their brothers in the northern kingdom of Israel, the Lord is going to bring the power of Assyria against them. The wrong politics of the northern kingdom of Israel continued. Another king in Israel, relying on the promises from Egypt, stopped paying tribute to Assyria, rebelled against it. Assyria sent an army, and in year 722 before Christ, Samaria was destroyed, the northern kingdom of Israel ceased to exist, and the population was sent as captives to Assyria. How about Jerusalem? Jerusalem basically followed the same pattern like the northern kingdom of Israel. They also stopped paying tribute to Assyria, and that caused the Assyrians to send army against Jerusalem. The people were supporting the policy of their king Hezekiah, and even we have in 2 Chronicles a very pious statement of the king towards the people. Let's read it. The king tells the people, "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or dismayed before the king of Assyria and all the army that is with him, for they are more with us than with him. With him is an arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles." And there is a comment on this, and the people took confidence from the words of Hezekiah, king of Judah. But behind these beautiful words was an action of turning for help to Egypt. The same mistake that the northern kingdom has committed was done also by the southern kingdom of Judah. And God again is telling them that it was against the will of God. The alliance with Egypt will fail. No matter how strong they are going to be, they are going to lose. The history of Israel began in two acts of rejection. During the time of Abraham, when he left Mesopotamia, he rejected their gods, their powers, and everything related to that culture. During the time of Moses, it was a rejection of Egypt. In both cases, it was not just a spiritual rejection, but also a political one. So why people shouldn't rely either on Egypt or Assyria? In those times when religion and politics were going hand in hand, reliance on a world power meant a demonstration of their belief that men rather than God, weapons rather than attachment to Him, determine the destiny of the nations. Subservience to a nation such as Assyria or Egypt meant accepting their gods and cults. An alliance with Assyria or Egypt meant also an involvement in their military operations. Yes, this is a good question. If not an alliance, then what? Probably you know the answer. It's basically the trust in God. Here we have a beautiful passage from Prophet Isaiah. "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength." But no matter how beautiful those words are, in politics and very often in our personal life, God is not taken into account. Against powerful Assyria, Judah needed a powerful Egypt. And to that Isaiah responds that the Egyptians are men and not God, and their horses are flesh and not spirit. Yet the question comes, was Isaiah realistic? Politics seems to be such a powerful tool. And so now comes the challenge, the mystery of faith. It is hard to learn how to live by faith, but to live without faith means death. There are, of course, frustrations in store for those who expect God to succeed at every turn in history. And yet, according to Isaiah, faith is the only option. Enduring strength is not in the mighty rivers of Babylon, Euphrates, but in the quiet waters of Shiloah that supply water to Jerusalem. Politics rely on money and sword. The first brings injustice, the second death. Isaiah dreams about no war, no death. Israel's security lies in the covenant with God, not in covenant's alliance with Egypt or other nations. Faith says God alone is true protection. In Isaiah 8:17 we read a beautiful passage. I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. The mighty Assyria, like any other empire, shall fall. And how? God will break it. Assyria's power for God is just a phantom. And who is really in control? Isaiah is telling us, the mighty Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy, let him be your fear, and let him be your dread, and not powerful empires or nations. And that is the mystery of faith that Isaiah reveals to us today.